out of an experience of being homeless, and have varied activist history. It's been kind of a while since I've been really dedicated to doing anything, and I've been wanting to get involved, really involved with something around homelessness for a while.
Tyler, I guess right now I would say I'm I have insecure housing. I don't, the correct terms always escape me, but basically I'm living with a friend for as long as it seems appropriate, and eventually I imagine I'll be back inside. So this thing sort of offends me and scares me. That's what I'll say.
Okay, Dennis, I'm here just as a concerned citizen.
And he's a teacher,
Well, retired.
retired.
Yeah. I'm getting old. What can I say? I'm not gonna work until until my grave, that's for sure. Isn't that why we have Social Security or something like that?
That's so cool, we get Social Security.
Yeah, that way at least I have some money if I ever live on the street.
Oh.
No, I have some housing lined up, subsidized housing for seniors. So,
That's cool.
I'm hopefully in pretty good shape that way.
Yeah.
I'm Paul. I've lived in Santa Cruz about 4 years. I'm a renter. I'm not in immediate danger of not having a home, but sort of feel the insecurity and see the concern and the harms that cause not having affordable housing. So concerned about it.
My name's Maria. I'm a high school teacher. I was teaching in Berkeley the last 20 years, and now I'm back in Santa Cruz, and I was involved with the Resource Center for a long time when I was here. And it's nice to get involved again. And I have students who are homeless and such, so I've really seen it from various levels, from the children to the parents and all those things. So I have to get involved somehow.
Dred. I'm from Salinas. I'm gonna call it my last name. I'm a vet. I've been homeless through all the whole thing. I'm seeing that this is kind of one-sided because they're making it a color thing. So I'm here to find out also the right to house.
I'm Kathleen. I'm a social worker and currently working at Dominican Hospital in home health, but I've worked with different homeless groups over many years, so I think I want to try to help.
I'm Keith McHenry, and I'm known as one of the 8 people that started Food Not Bombs in 1980. And I became alarmed, and I was seeing this language repeatedly by the people who are in this flyer, which we have a copy of, and thought, well, we should have a meeting and get the ball rolling, because it seems like this is going really fast, this idea. So.
Right, and publicly private, because they're not televising, those meetings are not open to the public.
Yeah, I tried to go to the meetings in Sacramento and wrote them repeatedly, and they would never respond.
Closed meetings?
Yeah.
Good God. I'm Aline Smith, and an old timer like Robert. We're probably active activists, underloved and overextended. Just was at an all-day workshop at Cabrillo. But here I am, and when I heard about it, a fellow who's going to join us soon. And I'm fortunate to have pseudo-socialistic housing, known as HUD-HA. But there's been, well, it's a human beehive. Most of the time it's pleasurable and nice, and I'm been there 35 years, and hope be glad when the owner retires. The bastards are taking it out on tenants in little and subtle and overt ways. because they put a place on the market, and nobody's gonna buy it, and the public, it's document at the county building and find out how much they want. It was something really outrageous, really beyond what they could ever get, especially for the fact of where, turn them in, if they want to make them private, if it's private real estate, nobody's, a friend of mine who lived there for years and reminded me, rich people aren't gonna want to live here. It's right across the minimum security. The big main jail is over there. No carports, no plush carpets. Of course they could, but for the people that are there and myself, it's ideal for the time being. Thank you. Didn't mean to make a big speech.
Well, it's a nice speech. What's your name, sir?
I'm Robert, and I'm with the Free Radio Santa Cruz Dwindling Collective, and I'm recording this entire occasion.
Okay, we might be on Freak Radio Santa Cruz.
And mention Huff.
Oh my God.
So I think what we ultimately, we can just have like a discussion on, part of the idea is maybe we think of something, how we can address this. So my first concern was the reality of this, which is that they're using the language obligation to accept shelter. And the person that is saying, the two people saying this in the state of California are the co-chairs of the governor's homeless task force. And they apparently, in a lot of their literature, they say they have over $1 billion a year set aside to address the issue of homelessness. And the other disturbing aspect is that, and the Sacramento Mayor Darrel Steinberg is the co-chair who's the most vocal, and he's the mayor of Sacramento. And so the first egregious anti-homeless thing I was aware of him was the very violent raid on a camp. People were injured, they sent out riot police, it was very brutal.
Good God.
So then he's around the same time he's doing that, he's appointed to this co-chair of the state task force. And then he is promoting the idea, as it says on this flyer, that living on the streets is not a civil right, and that you have to come indoors. And how we enforce that, work on that, will be for debate and discussion and a lot of good work ahead. And he has many other versions of this idea that there's no right to live outside. So then the most recent thing that he did is that he and the city council also did a first civil lawsuit in a long time that I'm aware of 7 homeless people in a business district as nuisance, for a nuisance. And very shocking that he did that with the city council. And then the most recent thing is that he is signing on with the city council and with the county of Sacramento, and now with Fresno County, and probably Santa Cruz will sign on in supporting briefs in a Supreme Court challenge against Martin v. Boise. And Martin v. Boise is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling that claims that you cannot be ticketing people for living outside if your community does not provide adequate shelter. So at the same time while this is going on, there was a Manhattan Institute, or a spin-off of it, a partnership called the Discovery Institute, published a white paper that there was no sense in building affordable housing because people that live outside are drug addicts and alcoholics, will never get a job, will never afford a property. So then that ended up being mimicked in a number of different videos. For example, Seattle Dying, which essentially says the same thing, that everybody's moving out of Seattle because there's all these homeless drug addicts on the streets, and that's why, you know, Amazon has to, you know, sell his mansion and all that. There's just too many homeless people. Of course, that's not really happening, but that's what this kind of a companion media piece is. And then we saw here, when there was a manipulation in city council to have people that were opposed to the homeless encouraged there to be debate about a night safe sleeping place in Depot Park, which is near West Side, and it brought out a lot of people. The chief of police sent out Seattle Dying on his Twitter account that morning, and they all came there and chanted, "It's not a homeless problem, it's a drug addict problem," which is what you can see in the film Seattle Dying, so mimicking the whole thing. So this kind of this general atmosphere that is happening now, and this idea that people living outside should just be placed in shelters and call it right to shelter, which is a lot like the right to work laws. It's sort of a similar language. I think it's ominous. Then, further making it more frightening is the fact that the president has weighed in on this, and that Fox TV is running a whole series of horrible movie like documentaries attacking the homeless and dehumanizing people and justifying the rounding up of homeless people. And then the quote from the Trump administration, who just went to LA to investigate shelters and to see how bad the rat vectors are and all this horrible stuff that Trump has been saying in the media, was questioned by, I think, the Washington Post, that's where I read it, that they're not going to round up people just yet. That's a choice of words. So anyway, even if they ultimately don't start interning people in internment camps immediately, just yet, the idea that this is in the atmosphere as being potentially okay is very frightening. So that's why I thought I was moved to call this meeting and see if there's a way of building some kind of resistance to this and what people's ideas of what to do to push back on this ideology. And I've been really concerned about this. I've been talking for years about the dehumanization of people outside as the first step to making it okay to put people in concentration camps. So I've already been publishing flyers about that, I've written articles about that, and now it appears to be that much closer, so that's what freaked me out. So now I think, why don't we open it to discussion if people have ideas, or maybe first talk about what your fears of this are, and if you feel the same way, that this is a very bad direction, and then maybe also we can talk about what it is we want to do next to organize around this issue. And I guess one last thing I could say is the National Union of the Homeless, for those people trying to start the National Union of the Homeless, and we've been meeting and having conference calls, and Wes and I are going to training in New York, and one of our kickoff events is to organize a meeting. There's going to be a video here, actually in the other room, on October 7th, and it's the 30th anniversary of the Housing Now marches that happened around the country in October 7th of '89, and which followed the Tompkins Square riot in New York City, which was a struggle between homeless people and the police, and the what we call Tenement Square, or Tenement City in San Francisco, a 27-day occupation of the plaza in San Francisco, and then there were spin-offs from that, which Homes Not Jails, where we took over abandoned buildings and housed people in the 90s. So we're going to show a movie here called The Public, which is by Amelia Estevao. And it's where they take over a public library and do civil disobedience action. And I think we're also going to show Takeover, which is the movie from the actual actions 30 years ago. So anyway, there you go.
You mentioned those movies, you're gonna show them.
When are you doing
Free, that's on 4 o'clock on October 7th. And the reason we're doing it at 4 o'clock is because people that live outside need to get back to where they're sleeping.
Right.
So we're trying to do as many meetings in this window between people getting off work early and people safely getting to wherever they have to secure sleep. So it's always a tricky.
Here at the resource center?
They'll be here in the main room, and we're gonna
Right.
serve free
Yeah.
food outside, because we're not allowed to have free food in the main room, but we'll have dinner for everybody, and then, and the 2 movies and their discussion. And maybe what comes out of this discussion can be proposed at that meeting to a larger number of people, and because I think it's very frightening. And I don't know if you, in my organizing around this particular issue, I noticed that people that in Hitler's time, the first group was the homeless and what they would call work shy and disabled and so on. People lived outside and they had to wear like a black triangle on their clothing. And they were placed into shelters and had jobs. And of course, after a while, they just stopped feeding the people and they weren't really useful anymore. So that's a concern. Okay. So who wants to speak first? Have any ideas or questions?
I don't know if this is a big idea or something I haven't before, but one thing that breaks me up about seeing when they clear a camp the way they do is destroying and trashing so many people's belongings.
Yeah.
And that there's a right to property that somehow is not including people who have their property right there.
Right.
And if there's any way to get, legal assistance that says, look, as the Boise decision, you have to be able to live, right? You have to be able to live, that's pretty fundamental, and you have to have the property you need to live. You have to, if you have your own shelter, you shouldn't have that taken away from you. So if the tools that are used by the government and the rich to defend their property, I mean, the more fundamental property is the things you need to live, not the ability to own things around the world. It's like the fundamental freedoms are to own the things you need to not die.
Right.
And so there should be a legal case, I mean, in the dream world where the government does work for the people, that when all the stuff is cleared away and they don't really have proper notice and an ability to get out of the way of the bulldozers, right? They're pretty much kicked out without time to move things, without any assistance to move things. So what can be done to provide some sort of legal defense in that way and say, hey, you can't take people's things away. You can't destroy people's property. Why is that any more why are not the people without homes protected against that as much as Jeff Bezos?
Yeah, now there's a bunch of varieties of issues around that. So Wes is involved in that currently, and you got a 72-hour notice or something for the sweeps that were in Salinas, or no?
Yeah, so, I mean, like Santa Cruz, they just walk up and you gotta go, right? And they just take your stuff. In Salinas, they post everything, they give you a 72-hour notice, but in their own law, actually, they're supposed to bring a social worker out, and Coalition of Homeless Service Providers is supposed to go out and assess these people, sign them up for services, whole person care, Housing Authority, try to set them up Section 8, general assistance, and CARS program for housing. But they don't do that because the CHSP was only 2 people at that time. So there's no way they could amass that kind of capacity. So they just post and they say get out, and they steal everything. Another friend says larceny. That's what it is. So, I mean, really, it is. If you can't provide a home for somebody, why are you taking the home they're providing for themselves? You know, and that's definitely the way it's been going. And they also charge $50 a shopping cart. So, you know, if you have a backpack, shopping cart, blanket, anything, a backpack that you're carrying, you're a target. And they love, man, it's stop and frisk.
What do they do with the belongings and 72 hours to get out of town?
Out of the area. So, you know, you have to be outside of that area, and if you're there that morning, they will chase you down. You'll be like, okay, well, we're only doing this section right here, but in reality, if you put your stuff across the street and you line it all up, okay, I'm safe, they come, they hunt you down, they grab everything you got.
Is there any legal justification? I mean.
They put an ordinance, so the ordinance has not been challenged on the state or anything like that.
Way? I mean, legal justification for the confiscation of property, is there any legal, you know?
As far as they're concerned, it's
basis
due
for
process.
that? What's that?
As far as they're concerned, it is due process.
But there's no real legal foundation for that.
Robert wouldn't, now, there was one lawsuit that was in Fresno was that not successful?
Yeah, it was. In 2006, a couple of activists videoed the destruction and seizure of property in a couple of these sweeps being thrown into a big truck and compacted. And they took this evidence to 2 teams of attorneys who thought, oh, we might be able to make some money out of this. And they also wanted to help because they also donated some of that money eventually. And they won a $2.3 million settlement as well as an injunction against that behavior, which has expired. I think it expired 2 years ago. But yeah, I mean, they were able, through presenting documented evidence, and this is why the local Union of the Homeless, such as it is, it's right now somewhat rudimentary shape as I understand it, has shown up. You, at the Food Not Bombs meal, had a table where people come and document what they've lost. I lost such and such a date, so such and such officers took it. And you may remember under the destruction of Ross Camp, the whole thing surrounding that, they created what's called SOP, Standard Operating Procedure, camp abatement procedures, which they're now using on the main beach to go after the campers who are there. So they do, I think, also post here 72 hours. They're supposed to store property. I think it's for 60 or 90 days. But the usual potential dodge around that, and I don't speak having really researched all the property being taken in Santa Cruz, but what they can do is they can claim its value is, I don't know whether it's under $400 or it's trash, and therefore it's a toxic menace because it's food, let's say, and then they just destroy it and they say, you know, tough shit. And also, the police department, if you want to reclaim your property, in the event that they actually do store it, you can only go down there for, I believe it's still only 4 hours a week. I could be wrong, they may have extended it slightly, but it's on Tuesdays from 12:30 to 2:30 and Thursdays from 12:30 to 2:30. Even though the police department is open, at least the business hours are, I don't know, 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, 5 days a week.
To reclaim properties.
Yeah, I mean, let's say you're sleeping and they arrest you and they take your property, or they give you a ticket for having an open container, or they just pick up your stuff because you're a political activist and they're trying to discourage such disobedience to authority. Then if you want to go back and get your survival gear, assuming it's still in any kind of good shape, which may or may not be. Also, often they require you to present evidence that it's yours, a description of the property, although I may be thinking of you in Salinas, Wes, rather than them
Yeah, I don't know.
here in Santa Cruz.
I witnessed Portuguese Tony getting arrested on Tuesday at City Hall, and they took him away and left all of his property just there at City Hall for a while they were dealing with it, Tony. And then they threw all the food in the trash right there, and they took a photo of a Trader Joe's red basket that was all beat up and bent, and told me that they were getting evidence for stolen property.
Oh, God.
And then I took pictures of all the property that was there, and they saw me do that. And oddly enough, when Tony got out of jail, he got everything back, including the Trader Joe's basket. And that's very rare. And I've spent a lot of time going down to the police station on those Tuesdays and Thursdays. And the thing is that they will hassle you about whether you really own the belongings or not, because
Oh,
of
God.
how many people actually put their names or something on their tent and their sleeping bag and those kind of things. And so,
And they think anybody that's homeless would just go out of their way to say, oh, I'll get some free material,
Yeah, it's like
steal.
yeah, they walk the person one by one.
Okay.
What they do is they open the door and they show you things that you know, you say, I lost my sleeping bag, I lost
Yeah.
my bike, and they'll go get a bike and they'll bring it up to the door, and then you look at it and see, and if you feel it's your bike, then you can say it is. Then they argue with you a bit about it, and then if you're successful, they give you the bike. It may be your bike, it may not be your bike. They'll do that with, and it's outside, so many people complained to me when we went there. They would get their items and it would be completely ruined because it had been sitting in the rain for
Oh,
sometimes up to 2 months. In some cases, like a Dreamcatcher lost a lot of his paintings and everything were just soaking wet and gross because
God.
he kept going there. And that's the other thing, is the Tuesday, Thursday hours are not necessarily true either. You can go on a certain Tuesday and that's just not happening that Tuesday. Or you might even go Tuesday and Thursday and it's just not happening. But most generally, it seems, according to statistics that the city council published about in their last homeless task force report in 2017, they claimed they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars throwing away people's belongings. I forget what it was. I think it was like $250,000 they spent, or more. It might have even been $500,000.
What?
And 11 million just on police time. And every year it's roughly $11 million, or 50% of the police budget is spent on people living outside in Santa Cruz. And then we've tried to convince the Parks Department, when they take belongings, to let us go through the dumpster behind their office over by, on Evergreen, and they never let us do that. And that's where
Parks
they,
department, when they take things, they put it straight to the dumpster.
yeah, they just drive it off to this huge, group of dumpsters behind their office. Yeah. And they've never cooperated with us looking through the dumpsters to find people's things. And you hear people lose their, you know, I watched a woman in San Francisco when they started this quality of life enforcement matrix program, where they bought special Honda motorcycles with kickstands, so they could come in a circle and use the Hondas as a fence around groups of people living outside. Then they would order everyone to take their shoes off. And they'd also arrive with a garbage truck. And you'd have to throw your shoes into the garbage truck, and then all your belongings, everything that you had, your blankets, everything. And I remember this one older woman had a photo album, a family photo album, and she just was crying and couldn't, you know, they just ripped that out of her hand. And they also, they came with animal, so what called it a matrix was that it was the Public Works Department, the Police Department, social workers, people from a mental health facility at San Francisco General, and the animal control. And so they would come, they would take everybody's pets, they would, you know, they'd check for warrants of everybody there, they would take people off to jail for that. And I interviewed a woman, I used to have a radio show at KPFA called Voices of the Homeless, and I took one of the women from there I was doing a night on how it is to be a woman outside, and she fell asleep she never spoke through the whole interview because she hadn't been inside so long, and it was just warm, and she just started snoring, and I didn't dare want to wake her up. But she was barefoot because she had had her shoes confiscated earlier that day by the police. And
So Voices of the Homeless, I've never heard that program before. How did it go? Like, was there a lot of, how did people respond, I guess, to hearing those stories?
I just ran this show every Tuesday
Okay.
at 7 for a couple of years, and then I was the first wave of radical activists to get kicked off of KPFA. Me and Bill Mandel, who shared you got the time spot before me.
So Keith, what happened to the woman regarding the issue?
Well, then I took her back to Civic Center Plaza, and I hope she lived. I'm sure we fed her the next day. And I don't know, we trying to get shoes for people is not an easy thing, you know. And it was pretty unfortunate that.
What reason, was there a reason given for, I mean, for some various of these actions that they were taking, that for taking people's shoes in particular?
Well, the idea was to make people so uncomfortable they would move back home, so to speak. even
Oh,
though-
right, because of course they had just decided to go and experiment with sleeping outside,
Right.
camping in the great outdoors of San Francisco, yeah.
I think, I think it's really exciting that that you guys are regenerating the National Union for the Homeless. I think it's a fantastic idea. My understanding is it's for homeless people. It's a club or a group, a union that homeless people join. And I think we need a parallel group for people who are not homeless to be, we have to have if there was.
Like the working poor.
Right.
I'm sorry?
The working poor.
Well, it could be anybody of, any whatever income, but people who want to get involved in this issue, that we need an association, organization for us, so we can push back against all the NIMBYs, I mean, these people against the homeless have loud voices, and there's only a few of them really, but they're well organized and financed, and they're very loud, and they have undue influence, and we could actually have a lot more influence.
Can't imagine the enemy that way, man. I
I'm sorry?
act like there's gaps.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
That's like a huge picture of the enemy you just put in everyone's head. You shouldn't do that.
Right,
You
so
gotta imagine we can defeat them. So if you make them a god in your head, they might as well be.
I think maybe what Kathleen was saying was that even though there's a level of power in the NIMBY crowd, that it's not that they are overpowering, it's just that it's a difficult challenge to take on, so let's be, smart about it.
Yeah, definitely.
So
Yes,
you want us to have an advocates union essentially?
Well, I think there should be a national group too, because there's a lot of people who want to help the homeless, but there's nothing to plug into, like in an organized fashion. I think there's way more people who want to help the homeless, a compassionate solution, who know we need to build housing for the homeless, bottom line, and provide immediate relief while the housing's getting built, but and there's a lot of people who are very disturbed and want to get involved. There's just no body organization, so anyway.
That provokes me to mention what I wanted to say urgent 10 minutes ago or more. Robert or Keith, please tell us, what is Ed Fry? What are lawyers doing? Why don't the ACLU chapter or the ACLU National do something? We're working on it.
Okay. Well, poor Ed did a homeless lawsuit, and he drew Paul, what's his name? My judge, the anti-homeless, Marigondo. So he got this really outrageously, vocally hateful judge.
Really?
And he lost. And I think he's kind of been discouraged as a.
Yeah.
And I don't know why he didn't try to get a change of venue,
Or appeal.
but maybe there's just no hope anyway. But this person, that judge, was actually used to be had a law firm that tried to stop food not bombs from feeding the hungry in Golden Gate Park in '88. Now
Same judge?
Same judge. He wasn't a judge then, he was a lawyer.
Oh,
Can I ask
right.
a question to the National Union of Homeless People, the people who are involved in that? I just want to know something about the strategy of, so I don't know how much involved anyone is with the talks at the higher level, but I know where I'm at, which is probably not where most people are at in this room. I'm probably the least either organized or plugged in or something like that. I have friends on the street, but I find that just the way things look and the way things are, it's so easy to buy into the propaganda and believe it, and about homeless people and about who folks are. And I even kind of sometimes myself get discouraged when I see different people just sort of doing things that I'm not a huge fan of. And
Yeah.
what I'm saying is, I don't know what's really going on with folks, and I think when you kind of see something from the outside, it's a much different experience than understanding things from the story behind the person. And so, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I wonder what the National Union of Homeless says about changing the story and how that happens, and because to be honest, I don't even really know who the people in the community are myself. Everyone's so scattered and fragmented and spread out. I only know a couple people, but there's hundreds, if not thousands of people outside in Santa Cruz, and I'm not even sure who we're talking about. So that's what
Well, it's not 100,000, but it's a lot.
No, hundreds or thousands.
Yeah, so allegedly, 3,000 people in the county, according to the last point in time count. And apparently 900 people in the city limits. Although the whole idea, the definition of homelessness is very fluid, which when we started, in the last time we had the National Union of the Homeless, that was one of the kind of areas that people argued about, which is what I call the hierarchy of the homeless. For people that only had backpacks or shopping carts, felt that they were really the truly homeless, and the people who lived in cars were not. And so there was so to build a solidarity that if you live in a car or you're living in a shelter, you're at the research, you're at the homeless service center, or you are living on Coral Street or sleeping on the doorway, we're trying to formulate and make sure that this is an inclusive definition that we can all identify with as people that are in the union. And then there's, and we really want it to be people that are I'm like a house person who's trying to encourage it to happen, but we want really people living on the streets to take the responsibility. And I think the biggest thing about it is like you say, changing the narrative. So the slogan from the 80s and 90s, which we're readopting, is homeless, not helpless, and things like that, and creating like a sense of dignity, and organizing from that point of view, that it's not.
More people need to see that, I think. At least I know I do. I mean, and I don't know, but I imagine the experience is similar when you are in an exposed place, or you're vulnerable. Typically imagine that you don't want to kind of come out and share your life story, especially if you've got stuff that you're either embarrassed about for whatever reason, or whatever it is. So I know I think it's stacked against people for that, but I know I look at language like right to work and right to housing and right to sanitation, and I see what you're saying, which is that all this language is used to do horrible things to people in the name of compassion and humanity. And people eat it up because, one, everyone wants the easy answer and also wants to be compassionate, and two, people just don't know who they're talking about when they don't know anything about the people in their experience. And I think it's just such a dangerous situation when everyone's disconnected. So I want to see people get either more connected or just, I don't know.
Yeah, that's why union is united, bringing people together, and so let's hope that. Now I noticed, for instance, I put up a banner we made a banner for the Santa Cruz Homeless Union, set out a table, we printed some flyers, we were taking statements about legal issues and what happened to who got arrested, ticketed, or lost their belongings. And I was impressed by the number, particularly Chief was all excited, wow, that's what we need, a strong union. And I was really inspired when Chief was giving a speech about the strong union. And he's kind of a natural leader of the people living on the streets. And I thought that was pretty interesting. So that's, you know, it's ultimately has to be something that's created by people living outside and formed into what makes the most sense for them, but to encourage that, you know, when I was at the founding meeting, I pointed out, well, there was an interesting crowd of people there. They all had different backgrounds, you know, it was really interesting. But my statement was that the people that live outside are the people that built America. Because in my experience, when I talk to people who live outside, they're construction workers, they're like plumbers, they're masons, they worked in stores, you know, at some point in their life they had, you know, school teachers, engineers. I have 2 friends outside that are engineers. So very capable. At one point, everybody was, well, just the skill of living outside is a huge skill. I mean, that's difficult to alone, you know, in a society that is criminalizing you. You've got to have a lot of skill just to live under these conditions. But yet just to remind ourselves that that's who the people living outside are. They're us, they're our family.
I would think because of that, like the people that live outside are some of the strongest people in the community because they're not like butchered in their minds by insecurity. They can like just live anywhere.
Yeah.
It's actually a huge freedom.
Yeah.
So if you take that back and you put people in houses, that's actually like capsizing a whole community, like a whole United States. Because you can't have that no more. Like it used to be free to just walk the roads, and now you can't anymore. You should be able to walk the land. That's how God made it.
Yeah.
You know?
There is, however, I would say, a distinction between people who choose to and who really aren't making a choice to be living outside.
Right.
So I think that for those who do not want to be living outside, there needs to be an alternative presented that's within reach.
I have to be
that's
honest, I like living
simplistic.
outside. I
Me too.
choose to.
Okay.
I actually want to. I never want to live in a house ever.
Mhm.
I actually go from city to city and actually live like that, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, well,
But
that's
take that for
yeah, that
Yeah, I'm not
basic-
saying there's anything wrong with it,
Yeah.
I was just
Well,
trying to
it's
say,
like, we have to say,
there are 2
you know,
different,
people are like that.
you know.
Get that. There's,
And that's what's so-
getting in the world.
That's what's messed up about this obligation to shelters, because it's punishing people for experiencing like the world as it's supposed to be experienced. Like how else can you experience the world besides just enjoying being in existence? I don't know, in stillness and getting corralled into like a cattle pen, you know, just because people don't want to look at you or just can't handle the fact that you're there. It sucks to think about that, and it also feels like you're robbing someone of like a fundamental right, even though I don't know what right it would be, but it'd just be like the right to not be fucked with.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, that basic essence of what you're saying is at the heart of the entire struggle. But so if you choose to have a job and pay rent and you're able to, then it's just the same as choosing not to and being allowed to be
Well, being an entrepreneur on the run.
Yeah, it's just to be a traveler and those kinds of things without being
I also like
criminalized.
sell lighters and stuff, like different kinds of lighters
Yeah.
and everything, and I do little stuff like that, and I get by. And I get by just with enough of what I need. I'm not like greedy about it, you know?
Yeah, and then
And
you
that's why I
don't,
like to live. I'm
yeah.
gonna go everywhere. And I don't see what's wrong.
Yeah, there's nothing, like, I mean, if you have people try to say your position is the worst one, or see, everybody wants to live that way, like it's some derogatory, horrible thing, when it's not it should be celebrated.
I actually
I
came to
know.
this city and I made like little areas, you know, where free furniture I found everywhere, and I made them elegant golden spots. There's a carpet and a tapestry and 2 chairs that matched, and they almost came and sat there. And I was like, cool, it's almost art.
So I get that, and I think I agree also with what she said, because even though I really enjoy that right, and I feel like I would fight for it, I know that it's not good for everyone, and it's not even close to possible for like a lot of people out there, especially people who are sick or disabled or something like that. I don't think those people could like do the same living outside deal as I am, or maybe they could, but they'd like be incredibly resilient. I wouldn't even know what that would be like, but yeah, so, you know, protecting people who need protection, that's different than caging people who are just you know, trying to live. And,
Well, that's where this slogan adopt right to shelter, obligation to accept it is an oxymoron based on what you both just said. I mean, there is a right to shelter, let's establish that,
Right?
but there's no obligation to accept it.
Choice and shelter.
Yeah, right. But I mean, there is a right. If you want to have shelter, you should have that right. You know that. But the obligation to accept it, that's an oxymoron, as you're saying. It should be obligation to supply it.
Right.
No, I mean, that's the natural
Right.
extension of an of the right to something, is the obligation to, give those people the opportunity to express that right, which is to supply, the shelter, not to obligate people to take the shelter. It's like obligating you to free speech. Well, you gotta speak, otherwise we're gonna take it away from you, which is absurd. You have a right to speak, but you have a right not to speak, You have a right to shelter, you have a right not to be sheltered. But there's an obligation to give you the right to speak, just as there should be an obligation to supply the shelter. I mean, so that one substitution of obligation to accept to obligation to supply changes the whole tenor of it,
Exactly. Well, here's, I think, is what Kathleen was saying. I think what a lot of people I talked to, when they heard the word right to shelter, they were really supportive. Because they're like, these were house people that were saying this. It's like, this is great. Because there's just, there's no place for people to go. But when they start to hear that it's obligation, that's a whole different thing. But people don't hear that in this whole conversation. So when Ross Camp was happening, you could see the compassion of this community. I mean, there were so many people I had never met that showed up there with food and clothing, and all these little kids would come there with their families, and there was a lot of support for people living there. So there could be a movement of housed people in solidarity with people without housing. And I think it would be a really strong voice. And also, like, for instance, when they made a petition to get rid of Food Not Bombs, 126 people signed it.
Good God.
And we had 2,000 people sign ours within half the amount of time that it took them to get 126 people. So, but City Hall, when they mobilized to get, you could sit, just by listening to City Council last Tuesday, you could see that the people want to get the homeless off of the main beach. They sent out, they must have really organized well, because you had every organization there. It was only in 3 days. They would get this massive resistance to camping on the beach. And our side had very few people.
Yeah, well, I wanted to get a sense of this because, not everyone's experience of the community is the same, but I often bump into people who either implicitly or explicitly say stuff like, I don't feel comfortable or I don't feel safe around the homeless people or downtown or something like that. And I don't think that that's, typically fair, but I think people get this. There's actually psychological studies done where you have to have 9 positive experiences to counteract the same negative experience just for one. And so I think, people's brains are just meant to take negative experiences and hold on to them. But at the same time, I mean, I know that there are some people out in, around that I probably wouldn't want to spend that much time with, just because personalities or just something. But then, at the same time, I guess, there's got to be something that can be done so that so much of the population doesn't even feel comfortable engaging in regular conversation with, people who are outside or something like that, or people who look dirty or haven't showered or something. I don't even know, but I'd estimate something like 70% of people probably have not spoken to more than 2 homeless people, and probably not more than 3 or 4 sentences in their entire time being here. And that is a crazy, crazy thing to me, to imagine that people can live their whole lives next to each other and straight up not even recognize one another. So, I don't know, I feel like that kind of feeling is what keeps bringing all this injustice and hate back into the picture, because nothing seems to change about just that general dynamic of just people not even being able to like have a conversation or just chill, you know? So, I don't know, I don't have any solutions to that, but it's just something that seems pertinent.
Is that fear of the other, you know, like
Yeah.
on this divide that feels safer or something weird like that?
You know, there's
I
certain,
love this idea that there was this, because that particular community was so exposed, that people could see them right next to the highway.
right, yeah, so everybody knew about
And
it.
so they're there, it's like you're thinking about these people, instead of being hidden.
Right.
They're there and part of the community in a more real way.
Yeah.
That, and you could see, oh, yeah, there's kids there, there's families there, and how many people are one paycheck away from being there, you know? So I think there's a newer level of understanding maybe that could come about in this era, as scary as it is, because the finances are so difficult and the housing is so expensive. Is there any plan or thought about having a camping space that's available and free and open? I mean, I think in Santa Clara they created this, right? Didn't they create a camping place with decent toilets and, you know, and support systems that
Do we
would come
have
and
one?
visit or something like that? Does anybody know about that? Because I don't know details, but he did it out near the fairgrounds in Santa Clara. They
They
created
may
it.
have started to do something like that.
We may have
There's-
a part over here.
There is one, but somebody help me here. The one, the Ross one was sanctioned or unsanctioned?
Unsanctioned.
Okay, so now there's a sanctioned one,
The River Street camp.
River Street,
Oh,
exactly.
there is one.
Well, yeah, so,
It's not quite as go.
yeah,
It's
so
not
here's
the same.
the issue
It's not the
is,
same.
around surrounding that, is that they, in this town, they were concerned, we sued them, the city, to try to stop them from keeping everybody out of Ross Camp until they provided adequate safe spaces for the people there. And the city wouldn't negotiate, and we actually had settlement, I think we had 2 settlements, one which they didn't even say anything, they didn't even give us a paper. And then the other one, they kind of sat there and then listened to us, and then they got up and left, and the city just walked away. And
They say settlements, you mean like you had a
in federal court, yeah. And then, and we provided a bunch of alternative ideas of how to like clean the area. We actually, there was a mobilization to clean the camp.
I gotta keep
Go ahead,
going.
take care, Dennis, thank you so much. So to clean the camp, and early on in the kind of, the chief of police actually seemed to, or fire chief seemed to be amenable to that at some early stage, but then found out he wasn't supposed to be amenable to working with us. And that's the sense I got. And then they testified that they had enough shelter for everybody, all the people living there, and
Where?
everybody in Ross Camp had a place to go. But what it turned out was they had, at the beginning, a week in tents on the benchlands, sent for 1 week, which is San Lorenzo Park, where like a lot of the, like the tequila thing was and stuff. So they like had set up a little camp there for like roughly a week.
Okay.
Although that got whittled down to about 3 days in the end because of all the litigation and everything. And it got whittled down to 3 days because there was a tequila festival that had to be on that spot, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And then also it was supposed to be like a low barrier, so to speak, to get in, but there was like a lot of, you know, ID and stuff like that, and it was just,
Security wand.
yeah, you had to get, go through, yeah, get patted down and everything like that, and they had like metal detectors and the whole thing. So no one really went there. I think, what, 20 people might have spent 2 nights there, 3 nights, and the goal was
San
to,
Lorenzo, yeah.
Oh, San Lorenzo.
yeah, and there was like part of
Oh,
the people
yeah.
that I talked to that went there were hoping to get the free tent, was their goal. And, but they didn't get it, and they were really cheap tents and probably not worth having. And so then they took the tents and they set up a place which used to be called the Boneyard, which where Public Works left all of its like large pieces of concrete and stuff that they didn't need. So they, behind that little fenced-in area, they put 60 tents in. And there's, so out of the potentially at least 200 people, 60 people got to be in this place behind barbed wire. The community, volunteers are bringing them drinking water because the city isn't providing them with drinking water. There are no showers, there haven't been showers yet. There's portable toilets. To come and go, you have to get on a van and they take you away because they don't want you to be walking in the neighborhood.
Wow.
Because the businesses and the houses nearby do not want homeless people near them. So the only way they were able to get this city piece of property available for these 60 people was one, as an excuse to not, to the court to claim they had adequate housing for everybody under Martin v. Boise. Needless to say that, and they also tried to have a system where they potentially kick people out of already existing shelters or not allow non-Ross camper people into places. So that was a real important issue to them. So maybe you were homeless living in a front street on a doorway, and then you would go, people started gravitating to this city table outside of Ross Camp to see if they could get some, they hear that there's hotel vouchers and so on, and they'd get there and because they didn't have the X on their tent and the number that coinciding with themselves, they were then denied access to. And I remember this one poor, these older woman and her daughter were like freaking out, and they heard about the coupons, but then they found out that they had to be in Ross Camp before they could go to the place, and they were just hysterical and crying, and it was really a nightmare. And but then what that meant was you went to the Santa Cruz Inn, and the lucky people got 5 days, 2 days. It only ended up being 2 days. And how many? We don't even know how many people, but probably.
They offered him 5, but then it turned out they cut it back to 2, is what some of the reports said.
Yeah. Yeah, and in fact, I never saw the 5-day permit. Nobody showed me their 5-day permit, but I did run into people with 1 night and 2 nights. And but there was a lot of talk of 5 nights. So at the end of 5 nights, actually, I ran into people that were in the inn who then just camped outside this building and outside the building next door at the end of their 2 nights at the inn, because where else were they going to go? So then there was you may have heard of a recall campaign for Drew Glover and for Chris Crone. Well, they attempted to put on the agenda a discussion about self-managed transition camps with nonprofit groups being the people that would help them using models that have been successful in other cities like in Eugene and Portland and Seattle. Then, because that was mentioned, there's a belief that could become part of the discussion that's inspired the recall campaign, and that's why they're being recalled. And
Backlash.
And it's the same thing happened to the mayor of LA.
Oh.
He got the recall because he discussed what to do with the $2 billion bond measure, and he was suggesting they build affordable housing. So now there's a recall against him for that. And so every place they cited, so for instance, the Venice Beach area was very enthusiastic for the bond, for the $2 billion, organized, the residents there were very excited. And so then their proposal was to build a facility in Venice Beach, and they organized to make sure it wouldn't happen in Venice Beach. And so that's
So there's
been
2 different factions and events
same
each
people,
itself.
Right.
same exact people.
In terms of solutions, if we're kind of going there, or at least, I don't even know if you call it a solution, but like a thing that could be done. I think, Kathleen, you were saying a group of mainly housed people who would be something like advocates for homeless people or something like that. Maybe not, but I don't know, that's kind of what I was sounding.
No, yes, that would be, yes.
Allies are in solidarity with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but also, I think there's kind of precedents, workshops and stuff that are done that are specifically designed to kind of counter or abolish or eliminate stereotypes. Except I don't think that many of these in the context of homelessness are done, but a lot of them are done in the context of racism.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't remember her name, but she
Harley?
just got back from one.
Uh-huh.
So I think maybe if you would apply the lessons learned from one to the extent that they can be applied to the other, that would be a good first start to just start changing the narrative. I mean, people have been working on this for a long time, so.
Yeah.
Well, there was a really beautiful, well, there's a bunch of really interesting related ideas to that, which is, one was a woman here made a really nice documentary and just interviewing people who lived on the street and how they're just very humanizing, and I forget, and that was the goal of the film, was to get to know your neighbors.
And if you can get that into the eyes or houses, or just basically get that to the people or in front of the people who are not active haters, but at the same time are not actively engaged, I think it's kind of like that move the middle sort of paradigm where it softens the fear and kind of extends the compassion enough for people who care about that to have an actual agenda that could work.
Another interesting thing in that regard, I had a physical therapist come to where I was after my first back surgery, and he was such a nice person, and he was so, and he was telling me like, oh, you feed the homeless, and like, oh, yeah, then it says there's 3 types of homeless, aren't there? There's the drug addicts, and then there's the alcoholics and the mentally ill. And so that was one myth that he believed was accurate. And then he said, oh, my cousin is a police officer in Gilroy, and he says that all the homeless are put on buses and sent to Gilroy. And you hear these 2 things everywhere, these 2 ideas. And these are people that have no hatred for the homeless necessarily. It's become so integrated into society that people believe that those are what is going on, and that they stereotype people to that extent. So,
do you think that's possible to undo? I've heard stories about on a counter shifting someone's consciousness overnight, and I've also heard times when you can get exposed to all kinds of humanizing stuff and still remain set in your ways. So I don't really know. But,
yeah.
Do you have thought on whether or not it could work, a campaign to do something like that? It could actually change the dynamics of the city politics or whatever.
Well, I have to tell you, one of the earliest theories of Food Not Bombs was to have a public meal which is open to everyone, so that unhoused people ate with housed people, and then the more they came there and hung out with each other, the more solidarity there would be, and it would get to the point where people that lived out inside would start, really making friends, and then that would, and I've seen that. That was it's 40 years of doing that, so
Yeah.
it's not the quickest model,
Yeah.
but maybe getting a hold of mainstream media of some sympathetic people, which there are. We have, to actually do a documentary that's the exact opposite of Seattle Dime.
Okay. I have a resource table. It's kind of like what you've got. Although you've got a literature table. I've got a resource table. I set it up sometime on Pacific Avenue, and I end up talking to a lot of just everyday people walking by, and then I kind of call them into conversation, and it's really easy typically to just, I don't know, it can be easy to get people to just stop for a minute, and it's a really good way to introduce ideas to people who otherwise would never get it through the normal news networks or social media or something like that. And it doesn't require people going door to door and house to house. But some organizers do that. But I imagine that to actually deal with such a strong narrative locally and nationally, you probably have to have face-to-face, a lot of really face-to-face conversations and do a lot of organizing, because I don't know. I like, documentaries and stuff are powerful and everything, but there's always that like bottom line of having a person right in front of you that you just can never deny, you know?
Right.
So,
Robert and Keith, please tell us and refresh our memories, and especially for people who didn't know, why was the shelter torn down with, well, lack of money? Why was money pulled away from it, and the undercurrent message and so forth? And is there any chance of it being reestablished?
What the?
The shelter on River Street.
Well, the shelter on River Street is there, but it changed its policies. And that was inspired by federal law.
There's more than one shelter on River Street.
Yeah, there's
To be clear
different
about it.
shelters from the outside, it seems like one shelter, but there's these little units.
There's
Oh
three.
yeah, I've been there, I've been there,
Three shelters.
Yeah,
but it's still locked gate, it looks like a little prison, the entrance.
Well, it's gated, I mean, there's
Yeah.
security and,
Yeah,
and
yeah, I
I have
understand
to
that.
say it's,
But it was such a contrast.
to what it used to be, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So are you wondering why the encampment was taken
no,
down?
no.
No,
So what
the-
happened was there was a change of policy at the
The
shelter.
shelter
And the
itself.
main thing was that the meal was stopped, so
Right.
it became a meal just for people in the shelter. And then the qualifications for being in the shelter changed.
And we're talking about the River Street shelter now?
Yes,
Yeah, like where
One
you've
only.
been staying.
Not Rebelli or, I mean, because there's Polly Loft
Yeah,
and there's Rebelli.
yeah, so those,
And then there's River Street, so, because there's three.
well, the
separate-
shelter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
everything
they're all
was-
shelters though, dear.
yeah,
They're all shelters.
yeah, there are three shelters
There are
in
three
the
shelters.
homeless service center compound, there's three separate
Oh,
shelters.
yeah, oh, excuse me,
Four.
right, yeah, I just got the
Four.
name mixed
Well,
up.
actually, I wouldn't call it,
River
Page
Street,
Smith isn't a shelter, Page Smith is transitional housing.
right.
I live there, I know.
I believe you, but it's really.
I'm familiar, I just
They-
forgot the
They eat in the same
names.
place, right? With you and Paige Smith?
No,
You got a
Page
separate-
Smith,
separate-
Paul Lee.
we have kitchens.
House.
Yeah, we do a.
Yeah, so yeah, so what you recall, so back when we started the Freedom Sleepers, this HUD policy changed, which on the face of it sounds good, and I think most unsuspecting individuals thought it was a fantastic thing, and that was housing first.
Right,
And then, so the idea was that there was no sense in bringing you in off the street if you weren't on a pathway to getting housing. So the idea was to get people through questioning them and so on. You probably had to do an intake thing, you did that
Of
before.
course, yeah.
You know, and then they think that you may ultimately succeed at getting a job and being able to pay your bills or having Social Security or whatever it is, and then you would qualify ultimately to get in the housing. And so you see the big banner out there, it says 700 people housed. And that,
800, it's 800 now.
it's 800, and that's 800 over 7 years.
Yeah.
And it also means that a family of 5 are part of the 800,
Right,
and that most of the people were housed in Watsonville, my experience. And but it's more than that. So many people have gone through there in 8 years. I mean, I know so many people that. So that, you know, then here's another aspect, like for affordable housing. I talked to Scott, who's the deacon and the kind of the finance person for the Red Church, the Calvary Episcopal. And he told me this long story of their attempt to take that parking lot and make a 3-story senior
all
living
right.
space. And they have not been able to get anybody to finance the building of that, including there's like a California organization whose whole sole purpose is to fund affordable housing. And they said there was no possible way that it could be made and be
Because it's
affordable.
on private property or?
It's on the church's
Church
property, but they just rejected the plan and wouldn't go forward. And they couldn't get any banks to, and I know that Sylvie is trying to make another between 40 room to 100 room facility on property the city owns next to the homeless service center. And he can't get financing for that, and he's worked on it for years. I think he got $400,000 pledged by Lighthouse Bank, but he believes it would be $20 million to build this building. And no one was willing, hey, wait, hang on. And no one was willing to, they couldn't get anybody to finance that either. And now the $20 million that the county received this year for homeless services went and was dispersed amongst salaries and operating expenses of the already pre-existing agencies. And that 20 million, if they took that 20 million and this 11 million for policing and put together, they would have the money they needed to actually have 100 people live in a facility, in their own apartment. And there are some success stories in town, like the St. George and the Hotel Palomar have been somewhat successful, and I know people got into them. And a lot of people don't qualify for those. Like, for instance, I attempted to get in, but I don't qualify.
The waiting list is 20 years or something, and you can't have pets at the Palomar.
Yeah, and you can't have misdemeanor convictions, things like that.
So in terms of, addressing this, the thing, I guess, that brought me here, and I suppose everyone else, is there any sense of what a good, next step or maybe first step would be?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, so the next
Register
step-
to vote, join the ACLU, register to vote, go to meetings.
That's all stuff we can do on our own, or I guess.
Yeah,
Yes.
what could we do as a group of us that felt concerned about this?
Well, you're gonna have this activity here in October, right, with having the movies?
Yeah, we're gonna show this.
I'm wondering if there was some other larger invitation to people to get involved and then create maybe some other kind of
Yeah, maybe we
big
should.
support organization.
Yeah.
I'd like to see good outreach done too, just in
Yeah.
an innovative way. I think there's a lot of potential to, I know that you're never gonna get a conservative to vote for Bernie Sanders, well, you might, but you probably won't get someone who's a NIMBY guy or gal to support Drew Glover or something like that, but you probably, everyone can shift a little bit, and that often is pretty strong. So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, no, I like your idea of having like some kind of connection between people and maybe get ideas, like to be able to sit down to dinner together or create art that's that makes
Yeah.
people understand and know who these people are in town, who are part of the community or something like that. I'm an art teacher and I figure out how
So like,
that connection
You got
can
your
happen.
be good.
Welcome here.
Yeah.
More than welcome here.
Yeah. We'd like to know who
Yeah,
you are.
Oh, yeah, I'm Gary.
Hi, Gary.
Okay.
Thanks for welcoming me. I heard when there's something about a forced internment, where people are homeless, that they're gonna ask them all to go someplace
Yeah,
to
that's what
do.
this.
And I would like to know what's the foundation and what is this proposal? And what just is it? If their idea of putting everybody into a place, in a lot of ways that might be good, but forced internment sounds like something I wanted to address right away. And I wanted to find out what is implied. Can somebody enlighten me a little bit?
Well, I will tell you what I've found in my research, and it's in the two papers there too. But so there's both a federal idea and a state idea, which are very similar. And so the new governor has started a homeless task force, and the head of the homeless the co-chairs are saying that there's going to be an obligation to accept shelter. That no one will have the legal right to live outside. That you would have to accept these shelters. So you would have to go to them, whatever they might be. Now, they're not really very clear on that. That's the state's position, that they're saying that the You probably heard, you know, the Martin v. Boise, that if there's not enough place to live, they can't take you for camping and stuff outside because that's unconstitutional, it's cruel and unusual punishment. So this homeless task force of the state of California believes they are challenging that logic, and they're claiming that there's no civil right to live outside, that you're obligated to go into a facility. And the federal government is claiming they're going to provide funding for government facilities that people will be obligated to go into. And the Trump administration said last week that they are not going to round people up just yet.
If I may interject something, I'd like to just make a statement about the ludicrous idea that they could put anybody in a place and govern them on what they can do, and when they can do it, and how they're going to do it, and who they have to live next to while they're doing it, and abide by a bunch of unnecessary rules for people that don't know how to behave, so that, you know, there is no possible happiness with forced internment of this is where you have to be, and this is when you have to be there, this is who you have to have as a neighbor. Nobody can tell me that that's what I have to do. And it doesn't matter who they are. If Donald Trump was going to put his wife and daughter in the mansion next door to where I live, and they told me that I had to live there, it might look like a really good deal. But if I didn't want to do it, that's my choice.
Right.
Yeah?
Right.
I don't have to do anything. And as far as I can remember, this is America.
Right.
Friendly is still free. It doesn't cost a dime to be nice to somebody. And what they have intentions of is not something where they have developed a way to be nice to us and provide for us, but a way to demand that we do something that they want us to do because they're not willing to look at any other possible options. They want us to relinquish control. They want to trade off our freedom because they think we don't have any hope. And that's such a ludicrous proposition. I don't know where they came from or who they think they might be talking to. But I've been taking care of myself for a long time.
Yeah, well, I think that's
I
what,
don't think that forced accommodations for anybody is something that they should ever have a right to do, regardless of what the situation may be.
It is a scary level of force that they're talking about, but they've already started applying to a lot of the camps. So the thing about building solidarity is, you know, it's just practice. Whatever they do to somebody else is just practice for when they come for somebody else.
Right.
yeah,
Right.
It's Niemöller, but you know, you gotta be aware that, yeah.
yeah, he wrote like 20 different versions of that poem that's so famous, and
Yeah,
it's just classic here. First they come to the homeless, then they come for the
it's
Muslims,
just,
and
it's
they
practice
come
for
for...
whoever gets inconvenient.
Yeah, I have information that is pertinent to this situation that you might or might not be aware of. The money that you said, all the government money that was implemented for these purposes. They have, there's a big one, what used to be a motel down in Watsonville, but they have low-cost housing, and they've taken people out of the psychiatric wards and given them apartments down there so that they have a place to be, and they have filled the place up with people that can't take care of themselves, and so they have to nickel and dime their money out to them, and they have a bunch of police regulating everybody's behavior, and it's like not anything where I would ever consider having a child in that place. I wouldn't let my child out of my sight in a place like that. It's abhorrible that they have no solution at all for people like that. And then they could take the, like you said, the motel, they could open up one of these motels, and it would be good if they could operate it like a motel where you could go and have a day and a night and a day and a night, and then leave. So you'd have 2 nights in a motel, and it would be clean, and everything would be there and not broken when you leave. And if you wanted to come back again after on the next week and get 2 more days, they might be able to provide a bed for everybody 2 or maybe 3 nights a week, depending on how many people there were. But if there is enough room, they could provide people rooms and let them have 2 nights. And then if they can behave themselves, let them have another 2 nights next week or later on that week. And if they can't find a way to behave themselves and conduct themselves as human beings, then they won't be eligible. It's just like allow people the opportunity to be an acceptable part of society. Give them a social environment where they can behave in an acceptable manner, in an environment that's acceptable, so they don't have to rebel because they're being mistreated or pushed into something that's not acceptable. Nobody can behave that way. Nobody can behave like somebody tells them to when they have to. You're all in the same situation we are.
I want to ask something, because you said earlier about, and this is still America, and it kind of, I'll speak up. This is still America, you said, and I think, I'm not sure, but I think that there might be a common idea or identity here in the U.S. of like this basic rule where you have freedom, you can do what you want, what you need, as long as you're not hurting anybody else, as long as you're not harming anybody else. And there is no situation where simply being outside is harmful to someone else. So you could probably make that understandable to just about anybody in the context that we've got, just saying like, it's kind of the basic foundation of freedom or something. What do you think? Is it a good argument or not? I mean,
I think it is.
not just good, but like, you think it work on
They
people?
actually have offered me a situation that I didn't accept. They offered me a place at the first tent city a little over a year ago. It's the same place that they have a tent city now, but it was
River Street.
the year before.
Okay.
And I wouldn't involve myself with that because they didn't have arrangements for people to be able to clean themselves. They didn't have arrangements for security, and people that they had to work there were, it finally got itself ironed out, but I wouldn't have been able to be there. I had to be someplace where because I'm handicapped, I have to be access to a restroom, and I have to have access to a place where I can eat, and then I have to have access to a place where I can get cleaned up, and I have to have access to a place where I can clean my clothes, a place where I can relax and not trespass or loiter. Doesn't matter where I go as a homeless person, I'm trespassing or I'm loitering. Unless it's on private property and somebody's given me permission, I stand a good chance of being told that I have to get up and move and go someplace else at any given moment, every single day of the year. And I have to contend with it day in and day out. That's the hardest thing of all, is to have a place to be and to be able to relax and hopefully enjoy yourself. It's not possible. Not possible when somebody, doesn't matter who you are, you're wearing a backpack and there's a stigma that what the homeless syndrome. Oh yeah, when you walk in and they tell you that you need to leave or take off your backpack before you walk in the store. Okay, you try to leave your backpack with them and they want you to take it outside, or you have to leave your bicycle outside, and it's okay if you're not being forced.
There's this triangle called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and on the bottom, so it's like this idea about what people need, and it goes in stages. And at the very bottom are like the basic things like food and sleep and water, and one of them actually apparently is homeostasis, which just means being still. Homeostasis, yeah, it just means being still, like just not having to do anything. It's a basic need of a human being not to have to move or get moved or something like that.
Like
I don't think people think about that, but
We also have to have a place for our love to live. We have to have the sense of rewarding behavior, to do somebody a favor,
like purpose,
to do help,
yeah.
to give kindness, to know what it feels like when somebody looks you in the eye and says, thank you. My mom told me that I can gauge the quality of my days by how many times I got to hear thank you. She didn't tell me whether that was how many times I got to hear it myself or how many times I got to say it. But just hearing thank you, you're in a situation where somebody's gratified, somebody has been fulfilled, somebody has a smile on their face. That's a pretty basic need, just to be around people that will treat you with kindness, decency, and respect.
There's no one like that here, is there?
No,
You know, Santa Cruz is a great place. There's a lot of people like this. The only people that I've ever really had any problems with since I've been here and homeless is the other homeless people that do drugs and don't know how to behave. They'll steal everything that they can get their hands on. They'll beat you up if you don't do what they want you to do when they want you to do it, or take what you have as soon as your back is turned. And it's hard to make friends that you can believe in. Hard to have friends that you can trust.
I've heard that from people who are, sorry, I should keep speaking up.
That's
I've
fine.
heard that from people who are also outside, and they suggest that it's difficult to not watch your back or like leave your backpack somewhere for a second, you know, because someone's gonna jump on it and run away with it. And it's kind of, I mean, it's sad because it doesn't make it an easy kind of one-to-one proposition. But at the same time, I feel like there's something that makes it so that when we like think bad things about each other, it's more likely to happen. And when we expect good things from each other and kind of give to each other, it's more likely those things will happen.
The hand in the cookie syndrome. The idea that, you know, when you put your negative expectations in front of somebody, you already tell them that you can't trust them, you expect them to do a bad thing. They're already being punished before you even open up your mouth.
Yeah.
They already been chastised and
Yeah.
demeaned. And that's just not the way to treat somebody.
And that's kind of
You
basic.
don't have to expect, your negative expectations create a situation where there's not a positive solution.
Yeah.
And I know that the best thing that I can ever do is relax. And if I can approach a situation in a calm, relaxed frame of mind, I always have a much, much better chance of succeeding. And somebody that is relaxed around me is a
Yeah.
blessing. Anytime somebody can relax around
I
me
tried, Gary, I
and not be
tried.
chastised.
I
A lot of people aren't like that.
No, too
That's like
much.
the stigma you're talking about,
I
right?
worked my whole life. A lot of these guys didn't want to get off their butt and do a thing. They think they should have everything handed to them on a plate. And they whine about the slightest little thing. They have a sense of entitlement.
Well, you can't complain about anything that's free.
Do you think that those guys that you're talking about kind of act the same way? If they're expecting negative things from the world, they're less likely to do anything positive, but if the world sort of looks at them as a positivity, they're more likely to be motivated in a way, or?
On the street level, I have seen people gladly relinquish their child because the drugs were more important. And they thought that the baby would be better off in a foster home because they didn't want the baby to have any harm. They were just more interested in getting high than they were of being a
Right.
mom or a dad.
We are the
raising a
most
family.
clever people,
And they could go and get a job, but they didn't.
probably in the presence of two of the most clever people
Oh, yeah? Is that,
on both sides of the hill.
okay.
He holds a world record in bench press.
Oh,
I
okay.
hold a couple of tickets myself that are even relevant, but yeah, Gary and I, basically you could end with us and go back the other way, man. You know, the buck suck and fuck stop here, it seems in a lot of cases. So yes, we talked about it before we came here. He's talking too much, of course. He hasn't been drinking because we don't drink. But anyway, I feel a place that is dry, a place that is secure, a place that is clean, a place, you know, wherever my mom was home. Even in the back seat of the Buick, you know, with the pillows going over the hump. You know, that was cool. And so anyway, the dry thing, when we sleep all night and get fed and stay dry all night at these places and they get us in the shuttle and drop us off at a parking lot that doesn't have any overhead, you know, that makes me mad. So I think a good thing would be like some type of just overhead, and people only need or have what they can carry, okay? And they get one parking space per person or couple. That's just if the day, down in San Diego, it didn't matter if it was raining or not. You can come in there and put your stuff in one of these parking spaces, and you come through a gate, you get checked in, you got guys like us, you know, knowing what's going on with everything. You know, you can't stop everything, but there are some good businessmen out there that do good business no matter what the product. That's all I'm saying.
Absolutely. And there's a couple of things that have been done for us that have really been successful. The day and night shelter. I've got 2 tubs there.
And storage?
I have a computer, a laptop computer, and my electronics, and I don't have to carry those things with me. So if they get stolen at night, I can leave them
Yeah, I just
there
have
and
peeled
secure.
for all my stuff.
And that has been a big help.
Oh, yeah.
To have a place where I can leave my bedding in the morning and it'll be dry. It doesn't get stolen during the day and I don't have to carry it around all the time.
Right.
That's been a big help.
Yeah,
And
right.
another thing that has been helpful, they have the soup kitchen, but the most helpful.
Hey, Rob, you wanna buy a penny?
HVAC and the free medical help that we get.
Yeah, that's.
Those people at HVAC have saved my life. They're my primary care providers and I wouldn't have it any other way. They have pushed past the Medi-Cal thing. They can't prescribe pain medication, but they made sure that I got everything that I had to have when I needed procedures done. They put me in a taxi cab and sent me to the hospital, sent me to a specialist, and they looked out for me and cared for me. People that run the homeless shelter over there have the homeless health care projects. And the people at the shelter over there too, they have a lot
They got showers over there.
good people working there, and it takes some doing to get into it. If I don't have a wife and a child, I'm not gonna get a bed there. I've come, you know, got out of the hospital and I stayed there for 3 days. And I had 3 days over my head after I got out of the hospital, and that was it.
So, hey, Gary, you said earlier about not giving up on people, like the community's gotta not give up on people, right?
That's right.
So what would that look like? What would the community do if it was not giving up on people? Like what more?
I would answer that question like this. If you're going to the store, say you stop at the CVS and there's a homeless person there, excuse me, you can assume he's either gonna ask you for money, probably gonna ask you for some money. Not gonna ask you for directions to the library. You already figure that he probably needs some help for something. Excuse me, sir, could you help me get some lunch today? Or what would you like? I can buy you something to eat. That's what I had in mind. I'll tell people I don't want any money. I'd be grateful if you could just give me something to eat. And ask them to get me what it is I need to eat, instead of asking them for money, and they know what the money's gonna be spent for. They figure everybody that they give money to, they're gonna either buy some alcohol or drugs with it. A lot of times that's the truth. Most of the time, it's not. I don't have to have money for something, I don't ask for it. I get along just fine. Only thing that I need, outside of my disability money, is my medical health care and that solution. And a place where I can sleep where it's dry. I need a place where I can sleep where it's dry.
Sometimes.
Those are the 2 things that I need in my life, is a dry place to sleep that's safe, and food to eat.
basic.
So now, we're gonna have to leave in 15 minutes. And Tom needs to go to bed.
What does anybody think about that motel? They got that big motel over there, they charge a lot of money, but they also have apartments in there. They have whole entire level floors. There's 2 whole floors that they could give. And I would
The one in
volunteer to clean and paint and do all the maintenance on the whole place.
Yeah,
They'd give me a room, I'll do the maintenance on the entire motel and get the rooms ready for everybody. Every time somebody leaves, I go in and clean it up for them and have it ready for somebody else to use it for the next 2 nights. I would gladly do that if I had a place to stay every night. I'm willing to work for what I need. I have my whole life, and it's satisfying. I like to work.
I think this is almost an emergency meeting, not to solve the problem, but to address a threat to demonize and incarcerate people for being outside.
Right.
And
That's a
that
positive.
threat, and even what's being done right now with the just shuffling people around camps. I mean, the original River Street camp was closed on pretty short notice originally, and that's part of how people ended up being at camps that keep getting shifted around as they get forced out. So having the right to shelter, like it was in Martin versus Boise, that I learned about more today, that makes sense, but not this thing where you have a right to shelter. You have a right to shelter here. We're going to force you to accept that right. That's not any sort of right like that needs to be. You've got to support people in a way that they would voluntarily choose, and then
Have appropriate facilities for them to not choose with,
Choose or not to choose.
Right,
Well,
right, not have an overhead.
if there were enough shelters that the city were providing, period, for the people who chose to be sheltered, then the voluntary charitable community could find ways to support people who didn't want to shelter there and find other options, right? Just like there would be more breathing room for people who just want to sleep outside. But there are a lot of people who don't and who want to have shelter and want to have something better, but they don't want whatever arbitrary cubicle or a camp that's they have to be bussed in and out of.
Curfews and.
Curfews and then it moving every 6 months and not.
3 days.
Here's another thing to consider. As far as I know, I don't believe I have ever seen an apartment or any type of living environment where there is not some type of a sliding door, where there is an outside area where you can step outside. There's a little piece of concrete where you can put your barbecue pit if you want, place for the puppy to run around or the kid to play, There's a little, even if it's a little one, there's a little backyard, And every place that I've ever seen has one of them. So you might consider there's a reason for that. People need to have a place where they can go that's outside. You go outside at sunset and sit and watch the sunset while you're cooking your hamburger, playing with the kids. You can't do that inside. There's other things you do inside, like watch the movie after the kids do the homework. Living life involves with being outside. If I want to lay down in my front yard with a sleeping bag and look at the stars while I take a nap, that's a really fun thing to do. I've been doing it my whole life. Started when I was a little kid. It's nice to sleep outside.
I wonder if we ought to maybe set up another meeting that will be before the 7th, like now, while all of us are here. And maybe as in addition to that, the other thing that I'm thinking that we might be able to accomplish in this short space of time that's left is maybe having a little more of a conversation about, I'm sorry, is it Catherine?
Kathleen.
Kathleen, thank you. What Kathleen mentioned, I think, is really key earlier in terms of having, we have sort of, I don't want to separate everybody any more than necessary, but we have the unhoused and the housed.
Right.
And how are we going to get everyone together? How are we going to organize each and or both in terms of, getting the show on the road with this emergency need that we have to get organized. So,
Paul was talking about building solidarity, and I know that solidarity alone is never, it's not really, I mean, solidarity is necessary for probably just about everything else to happen, so did you have an idea of how that happens?
Not really. The only thing I can think of is giving people sort of proximal ways, I mean, immediate ways that, you know, there's this problem, here's something you can do that will help. I mean, it sounds like the people just even, if when a camp is being cleared, people coming to help take photographs of people's stuff or whatever. So if you can have ways people can volunteer, like, hey, when something's happening, can you be on call and what hours? Finding things for people to do is, I mean, so coming to this meeting was something I could do when I didn't know what else, right? So there's that. So what are things that, you know, as a group we can do next? Like you're having this meeting in October with the film. Are there things with the homeless union that are coming up that can be involved with? Is there a
Yeah, that's a really good idea. So I'm actually going to be out of town until 28th, so maybe we could try to do something again on the 29th, Sunday the 29th. I could try to book this again for another and try to bring more people. And I like the idea of, so I can just imagine if hundreds of people had written, like the hundreds that wrote to stop people living on the beach, hundreds of people said, I own a house here, I support the people living on the streets, and maybe there could even just be like a petition almost or something of that nature. But I like also this idea you were saying about art, to have, because we have like an amazing artist here, Dreamcatcher, and we could do like an art show where it was a combination of housed and unhoused people showing their art, and maybe do like you did. You had a really beautiful display on the front steps of the post office, and we could use the whole fence for the and just advertise an art show, but also meet beforehand, like here, and do the art together.
Right,
That
there
might be
could
a
be
Has
like
anybody looked at the walls on the outside of the record store, right across from the Metro? The walls have 4 beautiful murals on them. And across the street, on the side across the street, there's another fantastic mural with writings commemorating the king. And fantastic artwork. At the end of the cul-de-sac, at the end of the street from Denny's, there's all the way around the entire cul-de-sac, paintings on the sidewalks where somebody has gone in and put their artwork down. And there's paintings and artwork all over this town. It's full of great, happy people.
That might be another idea, so we try to go to the Arts Commission and get them to organize a wall to paint on.
Right, here's my, a wall, a lot, a building is done, there's a lot of, what do they call them, wrappers with the wire. Okay, you can fill a whole block full of all those guys doing wire wraps on stones. Okay, then you get the radio down there.
Doing street performers and people with their arts and crafts, selling on the street. They set up and they're selling on the street, down on the boardwalk, by the beach, by the volleyball courts. People are selling their things, their wares, setting up and bartering and trading with their handmade goods all over the city. It's a fantastic thing that they're able to do that now. That didn't used to be that way. They used to write people tickets and make them stop doing it for running a business without a license and this and that. But it's okay to do that now.
Yeah,
that'd be okay.
Well,
I slept on the steps of City Hall for over a year to try to get arrangements for the homeless people to have a place to sleep. I have not heard my words for the evening. I have not heard anybody say one positive thing about forcing anybody to go someplace and stay there. I could say, I could see if somebody made a proposal and made an offer, this is what we have, and this is the way it is. If it's okay, come on.
Okay, like I
But
said,
tell somebody that
That's why
there's
we're all
gonna
here.
be a homeless
Right,
roundup,
right.
and
There's
they're
gotta
gonna have
be,
to go
like-
someplace.
an RV, you know, we have the new RV places to park where you're not gonna be harassed.
They have,
What's happening with that?
well, I think some churches have organized that, and I think it might be about 16 parking spaces right now.
Okay.
Can I say, I wanna just
That's
say,
probably about the maximum.
just wanted to say about Paul's, what he said earlier about direct ways to helping people. I think in my mind that offered a third sort of way of acting, which would be, I've heard this idea a lot about people either letting others stay in their driveway overnight so they can get a good night's sleep without being harassed, getting like permission and stuff. I don't know if people are already doing that, but it wouldn't be hard for me to imagine having, I mean, you couldn't, I don't know if you could get 100 people all to do that in one day, but it wouldn't be hard for me to imagine kind of one by one, and then kind of like mediating or negotiating the relationship or something like that, just getting people used to the idea of sharing space that brings people together, but also is a direct way to help someone else out.
That's a wonderful idea.
Yeah, like,
And somebody would have a designated place in their front yard where somebody could take and throw down a mat, and put a sleeping bag down and lay down and
reserved parking
sleep.
space.
And you can negotiate terms and still help someone out, like you don't
Yeah,
have to
right.
like just
And
give
so-
up your
so
privacy or whatever.
In the
but
morning,
there's a lot of
get up
people
and
who
leave
do.
and don't make a mess.
Yeah,
And clean up any mess you make when you leave and be quiet so you don't wake up my kids.
So you don't
And,
carry anything.
I can
more.
imagine a lot of people going
So
for
maybe
that.
offer them a bologna sandwich and a smile and a kind word before they head out. But yeah, to have a place to sleep in somebody's front yard, that would be wonderful. Or if you could set up your tent so that if it's raining, you could set up your tent and sleep inside your tent for a night. All right, so it's raining and it's during the day. You have to take what you get wet down and dry it somehow.
Well, there has to be places, the reason why they use the shuttle is to get all the homeless people from gathering in a residential neighborhood and, you know, doing their drinking and their yelling and laughing and cussing and spitting and peeing.
Last winter was the
And,
best yet.
that's why they pick us up down there.
But I have a
With the
question.
warming centers, and Salvation Army has their place for the people that are challenged, the handicapped that are developmentally challenged, you know, like I was in a walker in a wheelchair, and I was able to go there. And as soon as I got where I was able to walk around without having to have a walker, they moved me on down and made room for somebody that needed the spot. But last winter, there was housing for people with a warm meal in the morning. The fact that they got dropped off downtown and they had to walk away in a rainstorm every morning,
Looks like
that's
Black
after
Bill
you got a dry place to sleep and after you had something warm to eat.
Bill Hickok,
All right, and you would be out in the rain anyway.
Right.
If
Going
there was a
into the
place
rain
where you
like
could,
staying
a
dry
tent,
and cozy
the parking lot where they pick everybody up
Oh,
over
we got
there,
5 more minutes, Gary.
if they put up a big canvas cover over
like
the parking lot,
Merry
where all the
Christmas.
buses come in and pick up and drop people off, and the house, they have that corner covered, where when it's raining, people can go and stay out of the rain.
I know in Airbnb, they let people for $25 put a tent in their backyard, so the community is actually used to this idea.
But
So you
but
just
I have
float
to,
over from that.
yeah, well, I'm interestingly, we used to have people camp in the
Yeah, but it's cheaper
backyard.
than buying a
Yeah.
hotel.
Well, yeah.
Or
Yeah,
even your,
I would
like,
love to hear
you
more
would-
of these
you have
ideas. We
driveway
would have to
space.
take off pretty
Yeah,
soon,
let's-
so
why
I'd
don't
really
we-
like to know where these ideas are going,
Yeah.
or does that have
Now,
to
maybe
Yeah.
we should have gotten.
You wanna do
you
a
have
sign-in
enough-
sheet with
take
email
people's
and-
phone numbers and email addresses and names
Sure,
before
I'll
everyone
just
goes?
pass this around.
All the
name,
people that
phone number.
rent from somebody who owns the house, if the person that owns the house wants you to let somebody set up a tent in your backyard, and you're renting the place, they might or might not like it, but if the owner tells them that you need to let this guy set up his tent here, and he signed an agreement that he's not gonna disrupt
Yeah,
your
it's
life.
like a camping club.
Have an
like we
agreement
had
where
in
if
the
he
city.
violates, then they can just ask
Yeah.
him to leave.
There's precedence for agreements. It seems to work okay with the day and night storage program. That's an
Yes.
agreement-based program that, you know, it's not like you have to sign your life away. It's more like, you know,
You just have to be compliant.
did you want to address the next meeting question?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I'm gonna try to book this for, the last Sunday
Nobody's-
of the month. Try to bring more people.
Okay.
Starting it earlier though, so we'll.
Oh, well, maybe we should do it on the first, maybe the Monday's October 1st is in that way. Because my problem is I have to, it takes me until 7 o'clock to clean up.
So now.
Although we did, it is great that we had some people that were outside come here. The other thing is I think we want to think about, maybe a couple of different things. Maybe we could start to bring information on how to do this art show and when and where we want to, how we want to do it. We used to do a decorating party on the fence around, because that's the anti-homeless fence, is the fence around the post office. So we were hanging artwork, and so for a while we're putting stuffed toys and just random
Yeah, people
articles
were
on it.
honking and
But to
responding.
do a real art show that we
There still is.
publicize in the paper and everything,
In front of
with
City Hall, there's
like
a-
Gary was saying, with juggling and,
Yeah, it could be like a radio mobile
Is there
swap
DC?
meet.
yeah,
In
yeah, how
the
it
front
really
of the,
fun.
at the City
Maybe
Hall, there
Loud
is
Nelson or
a
something like
big
that,
showcase.
someplace
where there's
Oh, they
one
do it
big
out
showcase
art.
over here and another big showcase over there.
We
And
could
they rotate
potentially
people's
do
art.
that.
where- yeah.
And
They're
then,
still active. They're
the
still
other
doing
thing
that.
is to organize to start to talk about organizing a solidarity movement, see how that works, because I think that would really, like, maybe it's called like one paycheck away from the streets or something like that. You know, like some kind of a union of homeless people in solidarity.
And being very specific about what message we want to send, you know,